Hello, I'm IBXToyPodcast and welcome back to the episode of the IBXToyPodcast. This is something I like to do from time to time on my channel as a live stream replacement because every single Tuesday and every single Thursday at 8 PM UK time I like to live stream. On Tuesdays I live stream something kind of random, on Thursdays I like to live stream Minecraft, and this week I literally am not in the country so I physically cannot. I try to live stream wherever possible, I try to stick to that schedule, and when I can't I try to replace it with something that's, hopefully filling that same space in your life, and that's why the IBXToyPodcast is my favourite way to do live stream replacements on Thursday, because in the background you can see some Let's Play gameplay, so if you want it to be like a long Let's Play episode, it can kind of be like one of those. But also, it's like a fun opportunity if you want to just turn off your screen or play it on audio only. You can listen to Toycat while you play some games, or you play some Minecraft, or you do whatever you want to do. I don't want even washing the dishes sometimes. It's just a handy little thing that might keep you going. So with that said, that is why you're listening to a podcast. That's what I hope you will do with the podcast, but I guess it doesn't matter too much, so let's dive right into it, shall we? And let's start by talking about the big theme for today, because usually in these podcasts I like to just talk about some vague big subject, and in this case it's going to be investment, because by investment, a lot of people, when you hear that, you're like, you mean the money thing, the thing where you turn money into more money. That's a good thing. I'm a big fan of investment because, I like having more money than having less money. That's ideal for my opinions. However, I don't want to talk necessarily about the money investment, although if you want some quick advice, because finance with Toycat is something I really do want to do, here's some brief advice for if you want to invest money. Just pro tip, don't invest all your money in one thing. Very bad idea. Diversifying is a good idea, and don't invest all your money in very high risk stuff. If other people are investing money in something, there's usually a good idea. You know that saying, like, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. It really annoys me, but there's like a piece of that applies to everything in life, like, don't bet everything you have on one thing, especially if it sounds too good to be true, because every now and then you might make it big. A fun fact actually is I mined Bitcoin back when it was less worth than $100. I got 2/3 of Bitcoin and I was like, okay, I'll keep this, but whatever, it probably won't go anywhere. I'll leave it on my hard drive. And if you look right now at what 0.67 Bitcoin's worth, it's like, yeah, that like accidental investment paid off. But it doesn't mean it's a good idea. It's one of those things where it's like when you're on YouTube and you like you win the YouTube lottery. Like, you might say, I have like, what, 800 something thousand subscribers. That's absurdly lucky just in terms of odds. That's supposed to be somewhere in the top 15,000 YouTube creators. It's very, very rare. It's very, very lucky. But it doesn't mean that I can go out and say, hey, guess what you should do? You should follow your dreams and try and do the things that probably won't work out. Because most things that probably won't work out don't work out in the end, unless you try them a lot or unless you do lots of other stuff. But my point of all of this is just to say that invest your money in lots of different things and try to not invest it in bad things. However, today is not necessarily about investing money. I just wanted to go on a little tangent because I wanted to talk about investing and investment in terms of, like, I don't know, cults and your government and religion and all the other sorts of, like big organizations or whatever. I guess really anything that seems to work even though there's no right to why it should, and it really looks like it shouldn't. So, I wanted to kind of talk investment in terms of those things, because in the same way that if you want to get a mortgage out, if you don't know, if you want to get a house loan to get the, six figures you probably need for a house in your area, how do you get 6 figures? Well, you go to the bank and you ask them for money, and then you agree to pay them back over 25 to 30 years. That's pretty basic stuff, right? And the thing is that the bank knows you will pay them back, and the reason they can give you money at some of the cheapest rates in the industry. If you don't know, borrowing money, like on a credit card, absurdly expensive. Over a number of years, you're just paying back like double what you owe. Same with like, most types of loans. However, when it comes to house loans, mortgages, they're the cheapest loans you can get. They're super, super low percentages. You can get them as low as like 1.9% or something. How is it possible to borrow money, but literally in some cases below the rate of inflation? And the simple answer is because when you sign up for a mortgage, it's a really complex, in-depth process. But basically, one of the things you agree to is that if you don't pay back the money, the bank can take your house. At any point, if you owe them money for this house and, you don't pay them and there's no, agreement reached, they can take your house and they can use that to pay off the loan to themselves. They'll sell it and then they'll take some of the money, and then boom, they'll fix their problem and they get their money back. And because they have the ability to do that, because they have what is basically a threat to you that, like, you have to pay this off or you lose the thing, that's the whole purpose you borrowed it for, and you'll lose some amount of money on that, because there's that kind of, let's call it a threat, that's what it basically is, right? There is a threat to you that if you do not pay back, then bad things will happen and you'll lose your house. So because of that basic threat, although it's not worded as a threat, it's as simple as, hey, this is actually quite fair. If you want to borrow, £100,000 for us, $100,000, then you have to pay that back. And if you don't pay us back, then we're going to take something to get it back, because it seems only fair. But having that basic investment from you into that is what makes the whole system work, is what makes, houses, I guess, affordable, although it's arguably one of the reasons that houses are so expensive in the meantime. But still, if we ignore the macroeconomic, implications of having a mortgage system in place, and we just pretend that, like, oh yeah, so there's this great thing where if you want to buy a house, you can buy a house because the bank will give you money, then it's actually kind of cool that like, oh yeah, so by having that vague threat, that investment from you into the world/society, you can now get the thing that you need to get done. In this case, it's essential as having a house or buying a house, which, arguably isn't essential, but living somewhere is. You can now get that thing done. It's wonderful. And that's an example to me of one of the things that I've been spotting more and more. Just like, I've been thinking about it casually, and it just comes up more and more in the modern world that like, there are things where society demands an investment from you, and in exchange, everything is better for everyone as a whole, despite the fact that it's basically a threat that's not stated as one. And this is interesting because it's kind of the opposite of how it's always been. So one of the biggest examples of this, in case you don't like that one, in case you don't like Finance of Toycat and you're like, man, I don't care about that, but what I do like is driving, because in my country, the age is insert age here to drive, and I like driving a bunch, and driving is one of the freedoms of the world. But the truth is, driving has this huge, like, kind of hidden investment over your head, because if you don't know, in almost every country I'm aware of, it works in the UK, it works for most other countries, but there is some way to turn that license plate, which is visible on both sides of your car at all time as you're driving around, there is some place, whether legal or not, that you can turn that directly into your full name and your address and a bunch of other details about you. I think when your tax was last paid and a few other things like that. You can work out all of that stuff just based on this thing that is on your car, your vehicle, which people see you get in and out of, which you drive down and drive to everywhere you want to go all of the time. And the only reason that it's not like considered more of a big deal is because most people never look at the license plate. It's something you only look down when you need to track a specific vehicle, or if you're like law enforcement or something like that. Most of the time you see license plates every day and you just don't think about them. They're in your vision, but you don't ever dig into them. But it's the equivalent of having your full name tattooed onto your head and then having something like your address tattooed onto your butt. Imagine that in real life. If at all times people could physically see from behind where you lived, that'd be a little bit scary, right? That'd be a little bit wild, but that's how it works at all times while you're driving. I actually only learned somewhat recently that most other countries, I think the UK is an exception, I think the US is sort of an exception in some situations, but again, it's the US is a complex place, lots of states, but in the UK at least, it can't be expected that you have ID on you at all times. If a police officer asks, like, hey, what's your name, your address, etc., they kind of just have to go on your word alone. I'm sure if they think you're faking it, they can do something about that. And I have a cousin who actually, I think she's a bit of a sociopath, but she has this system where, like, oh yeah, whenever, I don't know, like if there's a train fine or there's a fine for this, or there's a reason, problem with what she's doing anywhere, she'll be like, oh, sorry, yeah, my address is, I just moved there, I don't know, zoom into a random address on Google Maps and say, oh yeah, it's this place in this town, and, it works entirely fine. There's no obligation to have your ID, and although there are bad situations like that, it's also kind of freeing, that at any point, you can't just be identified. You give out as much information to the world as you want to give, but that's not how it works while driving. That's not how it works in a whole host of situations, and that's actually kind of a good thing. One of the interesting things about this investment is it's one of the best forms of trust. For the longest time, the way society seems to have worked is like, okay, you do good things to other people, and if you do bad things, well, first of all, the most basic system for like caves and basic tribes is the distrust system, the shame system, where you say, wow, this guy, he stole from me, shame on him. He is the worst person. You tell everyone in the village, and now he has no friends. He doesn't get human companionship. He doesn't get to, help, be in your village when you give out food crops or whatever, and, he's probably going to starve unless he can find food all winter, or unless he steals and does more crimes. But basically, yeah, like that shame, that kind of like, oh, people won't like me if I do a bad thing, is a big reason why people don't do bad things, or didn't back in the day. And then it turned into like this threat system, I feel like, where, oh yeah, there is police that will go out there, they'll do pretty bad things to you. In, like the most primitive of systems, it's like, guess what? If you, steal something, you get your hand chopped off and you get thief written on your forehead or something like that. If you look at someone the wrong way, you get your eyes stabbed out. That's not okay. Don't be looking at people. The whole eye for an eye thing is like one of the forms of this, but still, there's a lot of like, let's call it threat-based punishments, where if you do something bad, something horrific happens to you, and there are people out there, police officers or just people going around enforcing that. So even the chance of having your eyes gouged out because you look at something that you shouldn't be looking at, that is enough to make you not want to do it. I've said it before, but like the worst part of like you to lose, if it's like, okay, so you lose one major body function, one sense, or like one key part of you, you're gonna lose like a foot so you can't walk, you're gonna lose like a hand so you can't do this, or do you want to lose like an eye and an ear? Always eyes at the bottom of the list. One, because I've had like eye pains recently, and having like any amount of pain in your eye is so much worse. Your eyeball is this weird bundle of, I don't even know what it is, like a type of flesh you don't see anywhere else that hurts to like vaguely touch it. Imagine the hurt in having that thing, like any serious operation, or worse yet, someone just goes in there with a knife. That's not good. That's literally the opposite of good. If only there was a word to describe the opposite of good, right? But no, you really don't want that. You want to pick literally anything else, so you don't do the things under the rather vague threat of something happening. Except, I think interestingly enough, rather than the direct threats and the direct guilt of seeing it happen to other people, of like the shame system, or like the, you know, the threat from some higher power of the, you know, like the law system, it seems as though a lot of like modern things, the way they work, instead of being, you know, telling you that like, hey, if you do something we don't like, then there are going to be some consequences. And rather than phrasing it as a threat, rather than saying, hey, if you, you know, don't pay off your mortgage, we're going to take your house, we're going to take you for everything you're worth, you're going to be homeless, it's going to be awful, it's going to be this whole thing. It's just like, oh yeah, so if you don't pay back this mortgage debt, which you of course are borrowing under those conditions, then, you know, we're going to take it away. Or like, oh, you want to drive your car? It's entirely fine. If you want to get involved in a hit and run and don't stop, then it's like, okay, anyone who spots that number knows your name, your address, and there's going to be severe consequences indirectly. And if you do any like kind of bad behavior, it's always linked back to you. If you want to just, you know, kind of be rude to people and get them really annoyed, they can come and get you back. And I've always thought that's kind of interesting that that's like the modern way of doing things, right? Because if you tell people in full-on law fashion that like, oh, it is illegal to do insert thing here, a lot of people react to that in a interesting but different way. Like, I guess there's a rebel in all of us, right? That's like, a law wants to tell me to do this? Well, I'm going to use a loophole. Like, it's the concept of the loophole is something everyone gets down with. Like, you're not, if the law is written with a hole in it, then you should have used that. Because, again, there's a part in everyone that just thinks, like, why should there be a system that directly threatens you? Direct threats are something most people don't like in most situations. That's just something I think it's weird about human nature that totally makes sense. Like, it's good that we don't threaten each other all the time, but then it means that if there is a threat that is made to you for the greater good, like, hey, if you want to put poisonous, you know, ingredients into food, then that's highly illegal. You're going to go to prison for X amount of time. If you're found to pass these tests, a lot of people see that as like, oh man, someone's trying to tell me what to do with my baby formula or my, you know, whatever it is, and they'll try and skirt around that requirement somehow because they see it as not like, oh yeah, they're enforcing the greater good. There's a thing that they're trying to make it so that babies or whatever don't die when they consume this food. It's more like, you know, what are they trying to do? Tell me how to run my business. And I think that's why the kind of new thing is like a societal investment. The interesting thing that I guess it's probably been around always and has always been a key part of how the modern world works is like the fact that society wants you as invested in it as you humanly can be. The reason that the areas that have short-term houses or people who have just moved in or have like some not necessarily connections to the place, other people care less about it. It's just a thing that they're currently existing in. It's not an area they care about. It's not a country or whatever. You know, they might care about. The big thing that's important is having people care about the location of their stuff, to care about not only the, you know, themselves in a world, but to care about the wider society, not just because, you know, it's nice to care about things, because, you know, it is nice to care about things. In fact, that's how we get a lot of the best things, when someone just really cares about one specific thing, and they dedicate, like, their life, and they somehow have, like, some specific skill they can dedicate at it. This is how a lot of the very best things in the world are made. And you know what, I'll just bring up, you know, if we're talking about things we like, Five Guys is going to come up inevitably, so let's just bring it up right now, and say, you know, it's kind of cool that they're like, oh, what if we just gave away free nuts, and what if everything was fresh that day, we never froze it, we just kind of brought in fresh meat, cooked it in front of people, blah blah blah, you know, all the cool things that make Five Guys great. You know, that's how we get a lot of great things. But also there needs to be the other kind of things where like, oh yeah, well as just doing things because I like them, I'm also going to do things because I know there are potential consequences if bad things happen. And I don't know where the line between like a threat and an investment seems to come, but I think one of the best examples is, you know, either owning your own home or like, you know, living somewhere for a long time, or having that, again, like the license plate system makes people be good drivers. Like if there were no license plates on cars, there was no real way to track down cars because there was only so many models and they all look the same, then, you know, people I think would break laws a lot more of the time because, you know, how is a traffic camera going to catch me? But you know, a traffic camera can catch you pretty easily. And in a similar way, if you, I don't know, like what offensive thing can you do? If you make really racist hand gestures, I'm sure there is a racist hand gesture out there. I couldn't tell you what it is, but I'm sure one of them is considered racist by some number of people. If you make that, you know, hand gesture to whatever group that is, then they're going to be like, oh, what is this about? And, you know, they're going to potentially come get you. It's that sort of system that's kind of interesting. And again, I don't know where the line lies, but I have found it to be one of the most interesting things that is coming into more and more places. If you think about something as simple as like travel cards in most major cities. So if you live in a major metropolitan area, or even in some of the smaller ones, you might have a smart card system where you put money onto the card and then you tap the card to get on and you tap the card to get off and so on and so forth. And there's two few major things about this system that aren't immediate when they strike the eye, because all of the countries that have a system like this have some major benefit for using it. I think that the least example is probably the smallest example is probably America, where in the New York subway you save like 25 cents for using that weird like Stripe card as opposed to just paying the cash fare. But in most countries it's like, oh yeah, it's literally 30% off, or it's some huge amount off in exchange for just signing up for this card and then using the card to tap in and tap out. It automatically calculates it. It's easier for you, and for us, let's just say that we just like making your job easier. But the truth is this system means that one, there is like this trackable system of where you're going at all times, which again, most of the time doesn't need to be used nefariously, but if they need to, kind of link it to a person, it's a lot easier in that way. And the second thing is the fact that if you, so again, for instance, on the London Underground, there were Oyster cards. They're now less used and there's contactless instead, but let's just talk about the Oyster system because it's, it's basically what contactless still does. So when you tap into a London Underground station, you go through the barriers and now you count it as being on the Underground. And when you tap out, it works out the distance between those two places and it charges you the according fare. If you don't tap out, let's say because you jump the barrier, or if you tap in but you do tap out, you don't tap in because you jump a barrier and then you do tap out, something like that, then it's going to say that, wait a minute, why have you gone out or in without ever going to the other one of those? Clearly you've done something wrong, and you might have done that to escape the largest fare possible. So they give some, kind of cursory fine. It's like £8, I think, in this particular case, and then that kind of threat on you is always like, okay, even when the barriers are unmanned, even though I know I could steal this, I can't actually because I'll get charged the full amount. This simple system, one, I think the rates of actually people stealing on the Underground is so low that you never see ticket inspectors. It's literally not worth going after the like 0.7% or something of people who choose not to travel with tickets. It's just not worth the time to go after them. That's the level of craziness it is. I think every other train system has some inspectors at least. I've never seen one on the Underground, and I don't believe if they might exist as like a like a spooky man, but I don't think they really exist because again, there's just that threat of like you have to do something twice and you have to have the fear that maybe something's going to happen. That system is basically just, oh yeah, we're going to give you this friendly ticket system and now everyone gets cheaper tickets because of it. But the reality is, oh yeah, so we have this system where, we track you just a little bit, no personal tracking, no scary tracking, and then also we're going to use that information just to make sure you're not stealing from us. Because let's be honest, most of you aren't stealing from us. Why would you be offended if you saying we're going to steal from you? And again, I think for the most part, these are harmless systems. Like, why does it matter? Like, worst case scenario, you get the £8 fine, and you don't even have to use it if you don't want to. But I think it's interesting because it really struck me recently that this is the system that has always governed the basic principles that keep, I think, our society together. Or at least it's the principles that people think keeps our societies together, and that maybe it does because of the placebo effect or because of a self-fulfilling prophecy. But basically, when you are young, you have no real care about the world that you live in because you don't really need to. Like, the world provides things for you, but you don't really need it to. It kind of does it against your will, right? Like, if for some reason your school was to close, and oh no, how terrible would that be for you, right? You'd have to like have fun every day at home. It would be so bad. And that's how like most of your life is. Like, things exist, but they don't exist for you. They just kind of exist like to you, I guess is a better way to say it. Whereas when you turn a certain age, like, the world starts being a wonderful thing. Like, once you have your own source of money, it's great that you can just go anywhere and people will be like, hey, that thing you have in your pocket? I would like it, and I would like to do nice things to/for you in exchange for that money. And you're like, wow, society sure is great. The barter system, and like, let's call it capitalism, but just let's say, the modern monetary system, it's great that you can get goods and services for people in exchange for just this magic paper that seems to vary from country to country. But as you get more invested in the system, as you do decide to buy like a car and you decide to buy like a house, which commits you into like a 5-year plan, as you get more and more committed to more things in the world, and as you start to like, I guess, use more and more of what society has, you become more invested in it. Like I said, like when you're young, it's really easy to say we should burn down the whole system, start something brand new that's less awful, because there are so many like injustices and awful things in the world. But as you get older and older, there's like a certain age you hit, and it's not necessarily an age, but it's like a attitude, and it's a, like, I guess, set of responsibilities / kind of that set of investments you have in society, where suddenly it seems as though everyone flips from this whole attitude of like, we can burn it all down, we can rebuild a better thing, because maybe we could if we started everything again, to like, actually, I kind of like how things are right now. I kind of value the stability of knowing that how things were yesterday is how they'll hopefully be tomorrow. The whole kind of thing of like, when you don't care about anything, it's easy to be like, well, I mean, worst case scenario, like, okay, there's a few weeks of starving and like like there's all this sorts of things, but the best case scenario is literally paradise. We can make this perfect world we want to live in. However, when you start to like the current world, when you start to have like hopes and dreams and in some cases like children or whatever, when you start to have things that rely on it, you're like, actually, yeah, I kind of like this. Maybe we should adjust the current system, but rather than burn it down and start again, we should, start changing variables. Like, be like, oh, what if instead of, having the magic number 10 in this part of the spreadsheet, we have a 9.5 instead? And that's something I've always found interesting, because it happens to people at a certain point in their lives, and people around me right now, it seems at least, you can kind of spot it happening to them one by one. Like maybe they save up for a deposit. I have some friends who recently bought a house. It's really cool. Like in the UK, and I think most Western countries, like buying a house is becoming a rare thing. So like I have a friend who's just I think he's getting married soon, and he's like he's just got a house, and it's like a really cool thing for him. You can see these sorts of things just kind of like happen around you, and maybe this is just a sign that like I'm getting old, that like people are having all these sorts of things. But one of the big parts of it that I find to be at least worth mentioning is the fact that you sometimes see, I think let's just say like older politicians in most cases, that are mostly, if they are on the side still of like let's burn it all down, they often are in really weird places themselves. Like like if you're young and you think, yeah, let's do my ideal version of the world. Everyone has a different ideal version of the world. Some are crazy, some are less crazy, some are really crazy, some are so insane that you literally, when you hear them, you're like, oh my god, how are you a real person that gets to make decisions on the same level I do? That's just a part of living in the free democracy or whatever we live in. But one of the interesting things is I would say it's like a rise. It's a more and more common thing of like super old, let's say like 70 plus aged people who are still down of like, well, what if we just like tore it all down, started fresh and asunder or whatever. And it's like, at your age, there's only like and then you look into all of them, and they always there's some weird things where like they never had that kind of like investment into society. While everyone else is there like, things are gonna be great, in 100 years we'll have done this, they're like, who knows what's happening in 50 years, 10 years, etc. And you can see kind of along the way that it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you're sure that the world is going to burn down soon, if you're sure that everything is going to go to hell, you keep you keep things safe. You don't make kind of risky assertions based on the status quo as how things will remain forever. And it's interesting because if you make that if you make the assumption that everything's going to be like that, then you won't benefit from if it stays the same. And I've always thought, one of the things you should just assume is that future you wants past you to be nice to him. Have you ever thought, like back in the past and been like, I really wish past Toy Cat had been more of a jerk to me. I wish instead of exercising yesterday, I wish he'd just eaten 4 pizzas, or like instead of exercising, for the last 3 weeks straight, I wish I'd just gone for a pizza every night. I wish I'd, like, I don't know, like whatever bad goal you don't want to necessarily have. It always should be assumed that future you wants nice things from current you, right? But yet for some reason, there's always a part of you that's like, well, I mean, what if that never happens anyway? What if the world ends tomorrow? We've got to have that in your head, and you always come up with like these weird justifications based on that. And I figure that like that kind of investment into future you is what leads to so many of the best things in life in general. Like if we exclude like, let's say like the super wealthy in the world, the very best things you can have in like your old ages or whatever, because I think about this a lot recently. Maybe it's because I've been watching BoJack Horseman, but the things that you can like kind of value the most are all of the things that like past you can do for you, right? Like would you rather have like if you put like that awful example that doesn't say valid in 2018, but like if you put £100 in a saving account when you're 14 years old, and then when you're 42 it'll be 16,000 or whatever. That'd be a great thing for past you to do. But like like basic things like like every single basic thing in the world, like, well, if you eat good and if you exercise and if you do all these sorts of things, then future you will probably appreciate that. And I've been thinking like, that's basically the same thing as this investment in society, but to yourself. You can basically threaten future you, right? Like, or you can basically threaten current you, like, hey, if you don't do this thing, then you're gonna have this real bad, pain in this number of years. If you wanna eat, because I've been drinking the worst lemonade recently. If you watch my Cooking with Toy Cat stream, I've been drinking that sort of lemonade on a frequent basis. It hurts my kidneys as I'm drinking it, but it just tastes so good. And it's like, hey, if you do that, there is a type of diabetes, I wanna say, you can get just from, drinking too much sugar or eating too much sugar, and, you're gonna get that. And you know how much it sucks to have to do that shot in your finger every day? Again, I knew a teacher that had it once. I might mention them in Let's Play Monday, but like, like the amount of effort that it must be to like do that every day, check your blood sugar levels, and then like put insulin in. I don't even know all of that, but that must suck. That must be a not good thing to do. Hey, if you want to do this to yourself, you basically threaten future you, or you do it in like an investment sense. Like, hey, invest in current you, or future you has to do this whole like finger pinning thing to get blood out. That sucks. That's not a thing you want. And yeah, I like for most modern life goals come from the same basic thing. And I think this is just like the modern common way of basically combining like like positive with negative. It's people say like commonly like, oh, the carrot and the stick. You need to have a stick to hit people with and a carrot to incentivize people, and it's super weird. But like when you combine both, but like it's an invisible stick and it's like a very very visible carrot, that seems to be like the best kind of system that most people work under. Or maybe it's just me and maybe I'm just like thrilled the modern world, but it is something I thought about a lot, and a kind of similar thing. So I briefly mentioned. I'm just gonna mention it one more time in case you don't know. I went through a breakup recently. It was a whole thing, and one of the things about I guess a relationship that when it comes to a close, I like to think about like, okay, what is the learning lesson from this? There's only so many relationships I'm gonna have in my life. Let's make sure we learn at least a little bit from each one. Otherwise, what are we doing the whole thing? And one of the, I guess, things that came into my head was the fact that, when you have a relationship, you have to kind of end it. You don't just like, it doesn't fade out. There's this very defined thing of like, oh yeah, there's a procedure for starting a relationship, there's a procedure for ending it. And, like, oh, too true for me, right? But no, it's interesting that like there is a set procedure for starting and ending it. And then eventually, the next level up from that is a marriage. There is a set procedure for starting a marriage or for proposing a marriage. It's called a proposal. And there is a set procedure for ending a marriage, a divorce. Except the ending thing is kind of like a recent addition to the whole mix. Divorce is kind of like a newish thing. So, and even then it's like, it's strongly discouraged by most people. So let's just say that marriage is this permanent bond. Let's say it's permanent for now, like a permanent until you go through some tricky steps to make it non-permanent. But, marriage is this thing where you say to someone, hey, how about we be together forever? And I've always thought that doing this for, like, again, relationships where it seems that, like, no matter how much you like someone at the start of a relationship, again, if it ends, there's always going to be some amount of hate that grows in there. But yet, with most friendships, if you like someone when you first meet, you'll probably like them later. It's just, oh yeah, your plans might get in the way of each other. You might have less time to meet. Maybe you move away from them or something. That seems to be how most friendships end, but most relationships end because you kind of like go have this bitter end feeling. So having marriage be for like relationships seems like an odd choice. Maybe it's because they end for so many bitter reasons that it's there to secure it. But I always thought what there should be, as just kind of like a societal mechanism, is marriage but for friends, or marriage, let's call it, but for strangers. I think there should be a system where like, oh yeah, when you turn 30, let's set this up as like a new societal rule. When you turn 30, you have to meet a brand new person. And, maybe they could be like speed dating, or let's just call it a marriage for now. But it's like friend marriage, right? Except you have to find a brand new friend. It has to be someone you haven't met before in your life at that point. So you have to find a brand new friend to marry. You have to have known them for like less than an hour or something. And then you decide to lock your lives together for some really tricky amount of time. And again, this sounds terrible on the surface, right? But this is literally how marriage used to work. It used to be, your relationships, the thing that your family is built on. That used to be like, hey, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna marry you off to this family. We need we need an alliance with, in a lot of like, I guess, Game of Thrones style shows, or like the new Netflix show from Matt Groening. Oh yeah, we're marrying you because we need an alliance with these people, so we're marrying our daughter. So there's that kind of link. By the way, it's the exact same thing, that concept of marriage, because oh yeah, we have your son, so you can't invade us, or your son might die. There's like an emotional connection to the whole war thing, and it happens the reverse way sometimes too. Like, oh yeah, we're gonna have that investment in our relationship, in our alliance, by having a relationship in that relationship. But I think, yeah, like having just marry random people, or maybe you could marry someone in the same business as you. That would be kind of interesting, right? Like, oh yeah, I friend married a guy who works at an equivalent company in some different field. So like, I run a dry cleaning business, and oh, it looks like I friend married a guy who works in the laundromat industry. Maybe there are some connections we can hook up with this, because we have to talk for a legally mandated 15 minutes. I don't know how it would actually work, and obviously you can't just introduce something like this, but I think it'd be so interesting. Like, how would a friend marriage work? Would they have similar divorce rates to regular ones? Like, if after, a year, you could divorce by going through the same lengthy procedures and proving that, it wasn't a good marriage, do you think as many people would get divorced? Do you think divorce is something that uniquely happens because of the nature of relationships? Is marriage a good thing in general? Because like, oh yeah, you've got this kind of permanent investment in there, because if you break up, then you lose half of your stuff, or the wealthy person loses half their stuff, and the other person might have contributed in some way. Again, the kind of argument that like is like the, oh yeah, well, if you take, a girl from 20 to 40, which is, maybe like half of her life at that point. Actually, that is exactly half her life at that point. She's committed half of her life to you, so she gets half of your belongings. It's a really weird system, but that is roughly how it seems to work, and it's still something people choose to get done, even to date, just because of tradition. The whole, if you throw tradition onto anything, you can kind of make it sound like a good idea. I still don't understand so many of the world's traditions, because they're not things that I did as tradition, and again, on the surface, it's like, this is really stupid. Why do you, like, kill goats just to, like, burn them and sacrifice them to gods? It's like, well, this is a thing we've always done, and doing things you've always done is kind of nice. And, you know, I think, like, well, this is stupid. Why are we doing this anyway? But, like, there are so many tiny things you do in your life that you do just because you've always done them. Like, every single day when you get home from work, your routine, again, it's not objectively a good thing. It's just a thing you do because it's the first thing that comes to your mind, which is probably the thing you did yesterday. You did it because you did it before. And if you take that same logic of like, oh yeah, the last 3 days this week, I've just gone home, thrown my bag on the floor, and then sat down on the sofa, and that's just how I live my life, then, you know, apply that to, like, you know, years, and you can see why something as stupid as, in the UK, for instance, at Christmas, we have party hats, we put on this little paper hat, and, you know, like, oh yeah, now we're in the Christmas spirit. It's objectively stupid, but you just do it because, like, it brings back the fond memories of when you've passed on it before. It's kind of like using nostalgia to make you keep doing things, and I think there are some situations where, again, it's pointless, but we keep doing it, but we should use that same tradition thing and just make up new traditions every now and then. Like, again, how about we have a fun, friendly handshake, or how about we get friend married? Why don't we try and make it a thing? Like, start making a tradition, like, have a few high-profile, really fun friend marriages. Like, what if Kanye West and, I don't know, PewDiePie had a friend marriage? That would be funny, wouldn't it? You'd love to see the adventures of that. And boom, that's all I'm saying here, is that tradition is both something that is stupid when you look at anyone else doing it, but yeah, when you do it yourself, it seems kind of cool. When you know people that have done it kind of great, you're like, yeah, that's great, isn't it? And it's kind of fascinating how that does work for so much of the world, I guess, that, like, if you haven't ever experienced something firsthand, if you don't really know too much about something, it's really easy to jump to the I kind of hate this train, and if you do know something about it, it's much easier or much harder to be on that same train, and usually you're like, yeah, well, that's kind of okay in XXXY situation. And in fact, I think actually that's why being exposed to more of the world is also kind of a good thing, for if you hate a lot of things, if you think you hate most of the world, if you really just violently think, like, someone needs to come through and they need to come around and fix that sort of stuff, maybe at least, like, expose yourself to at least the tiniest bit of it, because I think that's truly, like, the best piece of advice for most things. Like, you know, if you hate something, be a little bit more informed in it, because there's two things that can happen if you're informed in the thing you hate. Either one, you understand it and, you know, you stop hating it, and maybe that's a good thing for future you, or two, if you still hate it, then now you know how to really dig into it. I think showing that you actually know something when you have criticisms of it is a much better way to do stuff. It's kind of like, you know, on YouTube, people say this all the time, and people say this in any creative medium, that, like, if you're gonna leave a negative comment, if you just leave a purely negative comment, I don't care. I literally, if you leave a negative comment, it doesn't faze me, it doesn't hit through me at all. However, if you leave a constructive piece of feedback, that might actually help me to improve a video, or, you know, like, if you really want to, again, I hate saying this, but I'll let you know how to dig inside the Toy Cat mind and kind of, like, make yourself a home there. But if you wanna, you know, like, really get someone, like, leave some irrational, crazy free feedback, but with a little bit of truth sprinkled in there. That's what really, like, drives people to the point of insanity. That's, you know, how a lot of YouTubers go insane slowly, because people say, like, oh yeah, well, I clearly watched the videos, I clearly saw the same thing that you made, but also, I think that in this video, you were clearly making the wrong analogy about, you know, like, they'll say that, oh yeah, you were clearly talking about my religion, or my this, or my that, and I think that's highly offensive. And it's like, whoa, I didn't go anywhere near that. How did you interpret that? Recently, you know, just bring up an example, on the second channel, I said something, like, very clearly wasn't a thing, and I had so many comments saying, did you know this thing isn't in that thing yet? And it's like, no, I said they're not in this thing, and at some point they'll be in this thing, and they're like, but they're not in the thing, like, acting like they're really smart correcting me. Stuff like that, I don't know, it drives me insane, and if you want to drive other people insane, you can use that to your advantage. However, to kind of move away from all of this, because maybe you've liked something from that, or maybe you've thought for the last 30 minutes, like, hey, Toy Cat, I valued that investment advice, and I think there's some cool things you have to say, but I don't really care about any of the vague, kind of, you know, like, abstract subjects. Give me some direct topics, Toy Cat. So, direct topics. What's on my mind right now? I would say Mario Party. You know, it's a pretty new game as I'm recording this, and I really like Mario Party as a concept of just like a thing that someone is out there designing. In fact, I like most Nintendo games because there's always just some interesting element of reality mixed in there, and in the case of Mario Party, they're like, what if we made a game, but it's like a board game, but it's a game? And then someone was like, yeah, man, how about we make that? And I love when things clearly start from those questionable ideas. You know, like, I know that obviously there might be something a bit better, but when you can see that something started in a bad idea and then became something great, or started in like an interesting idea, those are the things I love. That's what I try to do with a lot of my YouTube videos, actually, is I'll be like, you know, I'm going to come up with a just really weird idea and then work on it from there. Like, that's actually a lot of how this channel works, right? Like, you know, like trying to beat the Ender Dragon without jumping, or like trying to make the safest house safer, for trying to win a game of Minecraft PvP without using any PvP. The reason, all these things are happening, as well as some future videos, is because I was just like, why don't I try and do this thing? It'd be kind of fun. Like, that element of just like, this would be a little bit of a strange thing. That's how I try to do a lot of the things I do on my channel, especially these days. And it's interesting that Mario Party really nails that on the head of just like, let's just throw things around. What if we gave people random stars that defeat the point of the game? It still might be a fun game. What if, all these different things. And yeah, I will say, I enjoy playing Mario Party, despite the fact that it's entirely, it has the same problem as Monopoly, where there's not really too much, like, skill and stuff attached to it. It's just more like, oh yeah, do some things, and then the game does its own things, and eventually someone's decided to be a winner. It won't be based on what you do and what you don't do, but you might feel like it is. And yeah, giving people the feeling like they control something, even when they objectively, I don't know what word fits there better, but when they clearly do not, that is another type of like superpower I feel like that you could probably learn from. I've always figured that in life there are some really powerful skills. Like when you're young, you think, oh yeah, I'm gonna get that letter to Hogwarts any day now. I'm going to become a wizard. It's going to be amazing. I'm going to learn how to like float, read people's minds or levitate or stuff like that. But the truth is, there are some really powerful like abilities you can learn. It's just they're all really much more restricted than magic. Like, I've always thought, so I've known like a couple of sociopaths in my life, and the power in which you can like, I guess, manipulate people around you into just doing the things that you want, basically. I've always looked at that and been like, I don't want to be like this just because it makes me uncomfortable being around these people, because I can feel it, but no one else can. Again, I've said some of the weird situations about that, and it's like, man, that's a crazy powerful thing. The power you have, if you can create pieces of media, even in the case of just like, let's just say a clickbait thumbnail, the idea that you can piece together a title, whether it be for a YouTube video or whether it be for like, an article or something, that makes people want to click on it. The idea that you can activate that intrigue sense in people, that is really powerful. That means that when you have a conversation with people, you can say something that will get them intrigued in what you're about to say, and then they'll be, deeply invested. Whereas if, again, most people, the problem they have with storytelling is you'll start in the most boring bit, in the like what's significant to you isn't significant enough people, where you're like, okay, let me tell you, you wake up for breakfast, you're like, I had the craziest dream last night, there was this dog, and its legs were broken, and it was my fault. And someone else hears that and they're like, man, this is an inconsequential story. Like the end result, even if it was real, it's not the biggest of deals, except it's a dream. And you expect me to care about that? Man, like, to you, it's probably a big deal. But knowing how to tell it to other people is kind of a harder thing. Storytelling and all those sorts of things, they're mini superpowers. Every single skill you can learn involving, let's just say involving words, but, conversational powers are basically superpowers in the realm of talking to other people. If you can talk to someone else and persuade them of your opinion in an argument or in like a big debate, or like, kind of like explain what you think, that's a really powerful tool that will help you change the world. And even if it doesn't make you change the world, it's at least encouraging, like discourse about things in a much better way. Because most people, this annoys me actually. So politics of ToyCat, the one thing I will say, because I refuse to talk politics on this channel, but what I will say is most people, the way they get informed about their stuff is someone in their inner circle. And nowadays, your inner circle can mean the internet. So some, person on the internet you don't really know has some wild political beliefs, and they share them, and people are like, oh yeah, that sounds like it's true, it's super radical, and just like the internet makes radical beliefs much more kind of common, and it's like, those are my beliefs now, and when someone asks me about them, I'll say those things, and if they ask me to defend them, I'll say, well, don't, let's not talk about the specifics, let's just talk about that. Again, like a lot of people get really offended when you ask them to like defend their opinions, but you should be able to defend any opinion at any time. And not because like we should always be on the offensive or the defensive, because like if you don't have a reason to be attached to your opinions, at least give it a rethink. At least be like, okay, well, I don't know why I think that, maybe I should think the opposite. Like in the scientific world, the way these things often work is to prove something. There's lots of different ways to do it. There's like by induction, there's by this or that, but my favorite way, and one of the most common ways, is to prove the opposite. And if you literally physically can't do that, that kind of proves that something's there. So, if you want to be like, okay, so can we prove that gravity exists? Okay, let's say gravity doesn't exist. How can we prove that? And there's no way to prove that the gravity doesn't exist. There's no experiment that will prove that, because it's not true. And, using that kind of like, alongside some other stuff, of course, but it's one of the easiest ways to prove something is kind of a thing. Argue against yourself is the best way to improve yourself, and arguing against any of the beliefs you have is an important thing to do that too. So yeah, to bring this all the way back into our original subject, I guess Mario Party. If you like Mario Party, be prepared to defend it, and my belief is that Mario Party is a super casual, lighthearted game. Nintendo does a lot of those, but having it exist and having it be actually fun is an impressive achievement, and honestly, some big part of it's always going to be I liked it as a child, and because of the fact that, Nintendo, Japanese companies, Japan as a whole, it's just really well designed in terms of sound. So yeah, I could rant about that all day, could talk about Japan forever, and I actually am going to go to Japan at some point. I've been planning a big trip just because of how much I enjoyed Japan, but this video isn't about Japan or Mario Party, it's about investment. So there's one last big investment I wanted to talk about, which is kind of like how it works on the internet, because the interesting thing about, like society is you always have some amount of investment because you physically exist in it, right? And when the internet came around, I think the biggest issue, I guess one of the biggest issues that still is there to this day, is there's a mass communication device where you can be as anonymous as you want to be, really. I mean, like, that's basically true to this day, but on the internet, you can be as anonymous as you want to be, you can have no social repercussions, and there's a lot of people, I think it's especially a certain type of, like, teenager, but also, like, fully grown adults that do this too, where it's like, okay, I'm gonna use this to say all of the terrible things inside my head that I know I shouldn't say out loud because everyone, shames me or guilts me or makes me feel bad about it, but I'm gonna go and tweet directly at the president or directly at insert huge figure here that probably won't even read my tweet, and I'm going to tell them just how terrible I think they are and what should happen to their sister and everything else like that, and that, I think they're gravel lovers even, they'd even go that far. When you hear all these sorts of things, and it's like, oh, that's just what some people do with anonymity. Some people use it as a way to bully, and it's interesting because this same thing has always been a problem for me online. I've said before, but I've always worked online. Even when I was 13, I ran my own, it's a bit complex, but I ran my own kind of advertising business. Again, long story short on that one, on the internet, and one of the biggest problems that I kind of bypassed by just being in an industry where apparently it's just the normal in advertising that people just pay you first, so that was easy problem. But most people, when you perform a service in exchange for money, it's the big question arises to, like, okay, I'll do the service, then you pay me, then I'll deliver the service, question mark, but like, shouldn't you pay me first? Like, the issue of, like, you need some services from me, I need money from you, we're both anonymous, so there's no reason for me to follow through. If you really want to, you can keep the money and have the services. If you really want to, you can keep the money and not deliver the services, not go through any labor. You can kind of cheat the exchange, and one of the biggest problems on the internet was always like, so how do you prove this? And so many websites were set up to, like, kind of have that history so that you were less likely to scam people, just because it's harder and because you lost more. Again, you were more invested. If I lost my account on insert website here, I had 4,000 posts, it'd been registered since March of 2006 or something like that, I'd lose my account on a really well-trusted trading website. Like, all these sorts of things, they exist to kind of bring that to you. The reason eBay feedback and eBay sellers was so amazing is because we finally had that. We had reasons to want to get good feedback, to want to be a good person like you do want to be in the real world. And the interesting thing is that investment can take so many different forms, and that is the beautiful thing that I kind of like about people who I spot all over the place, like both on Twitter and on Discord and stuff, because I'm like, yeah, they watch the stuff and I kind of know them. Like, people who are in the live streams, people who are always there, they can build up that trust, which might lead to them, like people who are moderators, for instance. People always ask, how do I become a mod? And it's like, I don't want you to become a mod just because you've asked. I don't know who you were before this, or I vaguely know who you are. I don't want to give you power based on that whole kind of thing. And it's interesting that, like, this same basic principle is just like at play. Like, hey, if I know you for a while, then I'm more likely to do a thing. And in fact, one of the big deals I've kind of been working recently, I've been working on one of the coolest things that I think I'll ever release as like a side thing to the channel for quite some time now. And the reason that kind of became a thing is because I started talking to one of the marketplace partners of Minecraft, a little bit more, and there was some investment there, and it happened in so many different spheres where, like, people just kind of know. It's like, oh yeah, and then they hook you up over here. Like, one of the YouTubers I know got me one of the most lucrative, like, streaming deals I ever had a few years back, and I used to think it was like, almost like a form of nepotism, where, like, oh yeah, if a company hires someone just because they know you, or just if like a streaming company hires you just because you are a friend of a YouTuber they know, that's just them being lazy, that's just them trying to get people in, but it's truthfully just a kind of vetting process. If you do something horribly wrong, they know they can get the person who referred you, and the person who referred you knows that you're a good person, and there's this kind of weird thing where, like, society works because of links. If you don't know anyone in a room, you don't know who you can trust in that room. If you know two people in that room, and those two people know some other people, and everyone kind of has a link together, you all feel a lot more trust, even though you don't know most of the people. It's just a weird concept in society that everyone's linked to each other, and that's why I've always figured, like, even one of the real benefits of humanity, because I like to go back and forth as, like, are humans terrible or are humans great? No, humans are awful, and they get in the way of most people's life, but they are important for a whole bunch of reasons besides just existing. And one of the most important things about that is just like, hey, knowing people is important because those people know people people, and because people knowing that you know those people just kind of sets off this whole chain reaction sometimes, and it's interesting in that way. So yeah, if you want to be invested in the channel, say hello on live streams, talk in the comments. I do read a decent amount of my comments, not necessarily all of them all the time, but I do read the YouTube comments. Check out the Discord, because I'm sometimes on there, or just tweet me when stuff is going down. Again, I don't reply to all of my tweets or whatever. It's like, but I do read all of those, and I do try to read a lot of the Discord. It's just how things are, and maybe that's an important thing to you, because I wanted to bring investment back to the start of this video, because you know, investment in like society and the world and the internet is also what will lead to a good real-life investment. So that's right, we're going investmentception today. So just a pro tip, if you do want to take some money right now and turn it into more money later, because kind of like having a savings account, except you want to actually earn money on your savings account, because nowadays, you know, again, bank accounts, you don't make money in them. If you're lucky, you make 1%, but the inflation rate is higher than that in most jurisdictions. So if you put money in the bank, almost worldwide, unless you're in like Argentina or something, you're going to, or Turkey or something, you're going to lose a lot of money by putting money in the bank. So you got to find better things to do with it. Again, this is assuming you have any significant amount. If you have like 100 pesos in the bank, or you have like $43.62, whatever, leave it in the bank. It's fine. There's no growth potential in that. I get that, but it is worth saying that one of the best ways to decide what to invest in is to get invested in it. Because if you care about something, you have kind of like loyalties in it, you understand it a lot more, then you'll know if it's a good idea. And this is why I want to actually kind of like bring this back around, even though this was meant to be about like, oh yeah, this is a weird thing in society that I've spotted that maybe everyone has known this whole time, but like kind of freaks me out the more you think about it, but is also something I think is needed. Again, something I'm not comfortable with, but I admit is important, is the idea that like society needs an investment from you for it to function, and for you to function within it, and for it to function for you, and to you for function for it. It's just a whole useful thing. But interestingly, in getting invested in that sense into actual investments is also a really good idea. So if you are like, you know, super millionaire in school or whatever, I've heard this is a common thing where people just start trading stocks. They make a lot of money. There's always a story about that from somewhere, right? I've watched YouTube videos of people who look like they're millionaires because they just trade stocks on their phones all day and are really good at high risk things. Like I watched a video where a guy's like, oh yeah, I'm down 300 grand by lunch today, but I'll make it back at the end of the day. I don't know what sort of stock trading you're doing where that's an okay thing, but some people are like that. However, if you're watching this and you're like, I would love to do crazy things like that to make money, but I have no real clue how, I think the best bet is to like really trust your gut on what you think. And again, I guess actually trusting your gut, probably not a good idea. Most of your guts are not worth trusting, but if you really know something, you'll make a better decision. And just to kind of bring this back actually, because I invested, or I mined, like technically speaking, by not selling it, I invested in Bitcoin all those years ago, and you know, although it's gone down since its peak, it still is a really insane increase over that initial value. There's a few other weird investments I've made over the years, again, like just purely for the purpose of like, you know, this would be an interesting thing if this goes anywhere. I invest in a lot of green technology, not because like I care about the environment. As I've said, I care about plastic straws more than the environment, and fight me if you disagree. No, I'm joking, but that's my real opinion, but it's a bit more nuanced than that. But like, you know, I invest in a lot of green style stuff because of the fact that like, oh yeah, as green stuff gets regulated more around the world, companies that do more green things, they'll make more money. That's a clever idea right there. If you really care about something, I think one of the coolest things is to invest in it. And it kind of works in a synergistic way. If you care about something and then you make money from that thing, you care about that thing more, and then you make money from that thing more, and you know, like the two things kind of work with each other. And yeah, my point here is just like, if you are at the point and you really believe something is the future, again, in my head, I've always cared about the future. I've always been thinking about like, what's this, that. I think, you know, especially in the modern age, in the technological area, in the age when you're a kid, when you're young, let's say. I don't know why kid comes up a lot, because I'm not calling you all baby goats, assuming some of you are baby goats watching this. Apologies for that. But in the age where you're young, you have a much better grasp over what the future is going to be than, you know, 40-year-old men trying to make, you know, vague decisions based on, you know, PE ratios and earning reports and stock calls and all that sort of stuff. And you can use that knowledge to, you know, like multiply your money by 10 or maybe lose it all. But still, there's a lot of situations like that where you can make big guesses. There's that really well-known fact that like, oh yeah, if you just took your money, invested in Apple 20 years ago, make a lot of money. And take all that same money, invest it in Google, you know, like 18 years ago, you make a lot more money. You take that money, you invest it in Bitcoin. You know, at one point, 10,000 Bitcoins was worth a pizza. Now it's worth some absurd amount. And I'm not saying invest in Bitcoin, by the way. I really always want to stress when it's like high risk that like, don't do this with any serious amount of money. If you do that, then you're leading yourself into a dangerous place. But I will say, like, there's a lot of crazy things out there that you might think are the future, but you think, oh, I'll see if that happens. But if you're convinced it is, if you're passionate about it, then maybe get invested in it, or at the very least, and if you get invested in anything, make sure you're invested in your investment. I'm just saying the word invest a lot, because let's be honest, the word invest is kind of nice. It's got that like kind of Latin-y feel to it, and I'm a big fan. So with that said, I hope you did all enjoy today's video. Make sure you like it. If you did like it, get invested in the channel. Share it if you liked it, because that's getting really invested. And if you want to invest in me, then, it's a terrible investment in terms of return, but if you want to, like give back to the series, you want to see more Toycat podcasts, one of the best way is to become a YouTube sponsor, a YouTube channel member, as it is called right now. Because honestly, on the channel, I am entirely, I need to make sure that I focus on the projects that most people watch. Even if people watch it for longer, it doesn't count on YouTube as being the same thing, and it's kind of a bad thing in lots of different ways. So if you would like to reward this and maybe see more of it, then make sure you become a sponsor at join.ibxtoycat.com. Or you can go to streamlabs.com/toycat, and there's so I'm starting a brand new terrible merch store there. It's not available right now. All I have right now is like joke merch, like you can buy a super zoomed in poster of my the face of the toy cat. Don't ask me why any of this stuff exists. There's also a tip function there. There's a lot of other stuff like that. I'm trying to simplify the toy cat system, unlike a lot of YouTubers where they're like, here's 15 links, make sure you Snapstagram me and you follow me on all these sorts of 15 different social media sites. I want to have a simple like, oh yeah, here's for this, there's for that, there's for that. I want to be clear about things. And in this case, join Discord if you want to talk to other people like yourself. Follow me at IBXToycat on Twitter if you want to follow me precisely. There's youtube.com/IBXToycat. If you want to see my videos and you don't want to be like fed to you slowly by YouTube's algorithm, go to that page right there. And then there's going to be Streamlabs as like a like you can just tip directly there, but also there's gonna be a merch store on that website. It's gonna be kind of fun. Right now though, it's just terrible joke merch that if you want you can buy, and they're limited edition, which is a terrible idea, but it's just a thing I figured I'd let you know about in case you get curious and like, why does this exist? It's the start of something new for when that does start. Anyway, with that said, I hope you all enjoyed the Toycat podcast. I hope it filled that gap in your Thursday where a live stream would normally fill in, and I'll see you all next Thursday because I'll be back in the UK. It'll be wonderful. Or, as always, I might be dead. That'd be even better. I mean, for some number of you. For most of you, probably not a good thing. For me, it would definitely be a bad thing, but we'll wait and see until then. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all in a week. Or never.